Hey everyone, this is Nic LaRue with FilmSnobbery. I'm here in Valdosta, Georgia. I'm at the South Georgia Film Festival. Kind of. I'm actually at the hotel. But this festival has been so wonderful so far. We are past opening night. This is the opening of the second day. If I'm a little slow, that's because I got in late last night and it's a crazy day. But we're doing it all again. We're interviewing more filmmakers today, starting with
Patrick Longstreth, the director of The Day That Shook Georgia.
The Day That Shook Georgia. Now, you had showed me just prior to us chatting about this. You'd showed me the trailer, and I would like to think I'm fairly up on history. It's a subject I really liked when I went to school, and it's a thing that I always feel is very important to culture. That things need to be remembered. Stuff I never heard about this. I would love for you to kind of tell everyone who's going to listen to this, what is this movie about?
Yeah, well, you mentioned that you're up on history, but you didn't know about this, and the older I get, I did just get more interested in history, and I find that the more I learn, the more I don't know, and so with this, I live in Georgia. I live in Savannah, Georgia, and I moved here in 2009 and been back and forth, but I've been living in Savannah full time for the last 6 years, and so I just I'm always researching a little bit more about my local history, just because I want to be a good citizen, And this story really struck me about 3 years ago. I read about it in the newspaper because they were having a 50th anniversary of this tragic event that really shook southeast Georgia. And so then I learned that there was a woman putting together a museum to commemorate what happened. And so I went down and visited the museum in Woodbine, Georgia, and I saw that she just had this trove of photos and artifacts and interviews with people. So, as a documentary filmmaker, it just immediately, my wheels started turning, and I couldn't stop thinking about it, and I wasn't sure if I was the right person to tell this story, because it involves a bunch of black women in 1971 who started working for this manufacturing company, a chemical manufacturing company that moved to this very small town, Woodbine, Georgia, and they were manufacturing different things at the time. They were developing rockets for the space program, and then that didn't work out, and then they started making missiles for the Vietnam War, and then they started making trip flares for the Vietnam War. And so they found that these trip flares needed a lot of intricate, dexterity, I guess, to assemble them. And so they started recruiting women, and they wanted to pay the lowest rate they could get for this government contract, and there was a high population of black women in the area who were really excited to make minimum wage. That was like a step up for them, because they, at that time, the only thing available to them was domestic work and picking, strawberries for, getting paid by the basket, So this was like really exciting for them to have just a legit job, and it had benefits. And so even though it was a little above minimum wage, I think. And then if you had a little bit of experience, or you could be a supervisor, then it was like $2.50 an hour, which was a big deal in 1971. And so some of these women would drive 30 minutes, 45 minutes just to get to this job. There were 600 people employed at this manufacturing plant. And so it was a big boom for the economy there, and it was exciting. There were also a lot of white people working there, and it was a diverse place as well. So it was exciting at that time to have a place that was diverse, and in a time when in 1970, the schools in that area were still segregated. You know,
Oh, wow.
even 20 years after they should have been integrated. So they were still struggling with some of those issues, and this was considered a step forward. And then the one thing, though, that they were lacking was some safety standards, which, you know, in that time, despite lots of tragedies that happened throughout American history in terms of manufacturing, you know, we didn't have OSHA at the time. And there just weren't protocols that we have today, and so they were storing a lot of this explosive material all in one place. And you know, I could give you a little bit of a spoiler, but you'll learn more about how it happened in the film. But basically, it turned out that the government or the army had misclassified this material. It was a class. They had called it a class 2, which is flammable, meaning that, you know, if you didn't store it in the right place, it might just catch fire, which could light a building on fire if you're not careful. But you know, you would probably have time to get away, and they had good sprinkler systems and alarms for a fire. Right. But turned out this material was class 7, highly explosive, most explosive possible material you could work with. And so one day it caught fire, and it had been catching fire a lot. They knew that there was a danger, but some people didn't do anything. So, you know, in the end, I think the army was ultimately blamed for what happened, but I think the company was a little responsible too. So I guess maybe I haven't explained what happened, though.
I think we've picked it up a little bit.
So right. So leading up to the big climax of what happened, you know, the day that shook Georgia, obviously it was a big explosion, and in one of the largest industrial tragedies in U.S. history, killed 29 people and injured dozens more. So in this very small town, you know, one of the women who died had 7 children, and you know, there were parents, like husband and wives, who worked there, who were both rendered, you know, disabled for life. Mm-hmm. So you had a lot of orphans, hundreds of orphans in this very small town of a few thousand people. Yeah. And then the surrounding county area. So it really impacted that community to this day. And so, but what's interesting that I found out is that there are a lot of people who grew up in that town since 1971 who have never heard of it. And even though it impacted thousands of people.
I mean, as you're putting everything together, I mean, is it that we haven't heard of it because it was one of those things where it was covered up, or that it just was one of those, it happened and the town moved on, and kind of because and that's small. I've come from small towns, so I kind of understand, like, that small town life. Something bad happens, they want to preserve the I don't want to say it's the tone of the town, so to speak. You know, they want people to be like, no, that was a tragedy, but if we sit in this for too long, it affects more than just this. Was it more of that situation, or was it because it was a government thing and the government knew they screwed up? It was this more of a, yeah, we are going to just never speak of this again.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question, and it's something that I kept asking throughout our interview process. We interviewed 35 people, so we got a really good range of perspectives. And what I've learned, what I was surprised to learn, and it really did change my perspective on events like this, is that my knee-jerk reaction when I hear about something like this is, who covered it up? You know, like the Tulsa massacre, or other similar things like that. You know, where it's, I
mean, in the same era, you're also looking at the Nixon White House. You're looking at, you know,
that's a very good point. It was a very big news time. You know, in 1971, like uh, I think nationally, this was national news for a day, but you're right. Watergate came right after that. There was all kinds of national scandals and civil rights events, even in 1971, even after the main civil rights act and all that. So yeah, it was just one of those events that didn't land in the history books, and so and then for the town. Yeah, it was just painful. You can't cover up something like that. I mean, it affected everyone. It was just a way of life for them.
At that point, then, is it more like a collective, we need to move on with our lives kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah. I think it was just painful, and they didn't want it to define them,
Yeah.
and so you can appreciate that. And so it just wasn't talked about, even though they were dealing with a lawsuit for 17 years. So it was talked about a lot in terms of the lawsuit, and I think people just got tired of talking about the lawsuit and everything, and a lot of people went back to work at that same plant actually. So they didn't, it wasn't like they got shut down or the government took away their contract. They just kept going, and then actually that company Thiokol went on to manufacture the rocket boosters for the Challenger. So, it's amazing to me how government contractors can make a lot of, I don't know if you would say like insufficient products, I guess, in different ways. Not always just dangerous, but once they're in there and they're the contact, they keep getting those contracts. So.
I mean, and some of that comes down to, if anyone who's ever done, I've done government contract bidding before.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of times it's just like who comes in the lowest, and
What's the lowest?
and yeah, and you sometimes you get what you pay for.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes there are companies that literally they're the only ones who can make that specific product. There are no competitors really.
Yeah.
So, in a way you can't blame the government, I guess, for going with that one person who can make that one widget on the tank or whatever it is. And so, but then when you end up with his, some bad products sometimes. So the town kind of collectively moved on, I would say, and there were a lot of children who were kind of sheltered from the story just because it was painful, and kids, parents and grandparents just didn't want to have to tell their kids about this tragic event. But now, for me, coming in as an outsider 50 years later, it turns out there's a lot of people who want to tell the story now, and enough time has passed. And some folks were in their 80s and 90s that we interviewed, so they saw this as our last chance to tell the story. There was one woman who's 95 years old. She was the personnel manager at the plant, and she said, "This is the first time I've talked about Thiokol, and this is the last time I'll talk about Thiokol." So that was, she started off the interview with that. So it was a little bit scary for me, like, no pressure, because, we only get one shot at these interviews. And yeah.
Did you find that anyone was reticent at all to talk about it, or for a couple of reasons? One, because it's a painful memory, as you kind of went over, but also one of the first things you were saying at the beginning of the interview here was, you're a white guy, and
Yeah.
this is a predominantly black story, maybe not 100%, and in terms of what you said, it was a very integrated plant, but were people worried that about what your take on the story would be, and not necessarily being sensitive to the cultural aspect of what the story would be? Like, the docs are great because docs are facts, right? Like, you're reporting on, and trying to give context to, like, something that happened, an event or a person or something like that. But I think that when we do tell a story, we are telling it from a very, whatever our perspective is based on our personal experiences. And so when you go and you are talking to people that about, and it's something that either A, you didn't live through, and culturally speaking, you're somewhat separated from, sometimes people clam up a little bit on that. Did you have any problems getting, material, getting, I mean, it's great that the museum was open for it. So, you had physical artifacts and things and information to mine. But from the interview perspective, was it difficult to wrangle people for that?
Well, the key to this whole film was Janie Everett, the woman who started the museum, and she runs the Thiokol Memorial Project. So they put on the commemoration every year, and she gives lectures on the history. And she's the daughter of one of the survivors, so she's retired now, and this is her full-time job running the foundation and the museum. So she, without her, we would have no movie for sure. And she set up a lot of the interviews for us, which was great. So she already knew who was willing to talk and who wasn't. And so the interviews all went very smoothly, I would say. I tried not to push people too hard in terms of reliving some of the graphic details, because there are just endless gory details, and so I wasn't afraid of learning about any of that. As a filmmaker and journalist, you kind of have to dive into those details, and that was probably my main hesitation with taking on this project was, do I want to delve into this and live this story over and over again for years, if so be it, in order to get the film finished. But then it was just all of it was just so fascinating. So the questions and the details were just essential. And then but I didn't push people too hard. People opened up very easily. And then in putting the film together, I had to really figure out the right tone for presenting all this tragic material without really,
Without really bumming out the audience the whole time.
Too much, yeah, and even just grossing them out. I was like, do I need to put a content warning or something? But we, I think we did a good job of telling the story. So that you get the idea of what really happened without showing too much. And we shot some reenactments, and we converted the reenactment into animation. So we came up with I think a really nice style that really captures your eye and your imagination.
Yeah, I saw that during the trailer, and I actually that you showed me, and I want to address that for a minute, because I also think that that's a really powerful and good way to show stuff like that. I saw another movie recently about it had to do with communist China and the Falun Gong and all that kind of stuff. It had a very similar thing, because the person who was putting that movie together was an animator, and so or a comic book artist actually, and so he did very similar reenactment type of things in that similar style, and I find it to be very engaging, because you can do so much with the colors, you can do so much with the the line, even just the line play and all that kind of stuff. But
Eternal Spring, you're talking about?
Eternal Spring, that's exactly what it was.
I know the director. Yeah, we've had another film of mine played at a festival with him. We actually have the same agent. His film was an inspiration for mine in a big way. The way he mixed the documentary interviews with the animation. Yeah, and his animation is really incredible. It's on a whole other level from what we did, but yeah, big inspiration. Yeah.
It kind of reminded me too of a let's call it the indie version of a Scanner Darkly, in terms of that almost rotoscoped in, but animated. I don't know. It was realistic, but just detached enough to be its own kind of thing. I love it.
Yeah, the Richard Linklater animation was also a big inspiration of mine, because I've always been a fan of Richard Linklater's animated films. And I think they call that rotomation. And so we did it is very much a rotomation style. I came up with kind of a new workflow, though, that just involves less people, but it achieves a pretty similar result to those Richard Linklater animated films. Yeah.
And this is a 26-minute-ish long film, and I know you were saying that you kind of cut it down. It could have been maybe an hour or whatever. I mean, stylistic choices aside, was there ever an idea that this might be a feature? It sounds like there's enough material that you probably could have gone feature length fairly, easily.
Yeah, it's a good question. We were wrestling with it, continuing to film, and there was the initial interview phase, but then we were trying to follow the present day story of just what's happening in the town and with the museum and commemorating this, because one of the main parts of the film is that Janie is trying to get the victims awarded with the Congressional Gold Medal. So we were kind of holding out to see if that would transpire and we would take a trip to the Congress or the White House, and that would be an amazing ending to a feature. But it just didn't look like that was going to happen anytime soon, so we decided to just put the short out there. And it'll premiere on PBS on April 8th, which is exciting. And so PBS has the rights to this short version. But we still have a lot more footage, and I think there is the opportunity to expand it into an hour maybe special, either on PBS or somewhere else. Or I think if the right person was interested in making it into a narrative feature, it would be a really harrowing story as a narrative as well.
I mean, even kind of like what they did with the Chernobyl limited series.
Yeah, that was also a big inspiration. Exactly. And yeah, I was talking to some producers who were trying to pitch this as the Chernobyl of the Southeast. And I think there are some parallels. There's some differences too, though, with Chernobyl and this. But yeah, in terms of like a gripping narrative style, yeah, that would be amazing if we could turn it into something like that. Yeah.
Now let's talk about we're here again at the South Georgia Film Festival. This is your premiere here with this. What are some of the factors? This is not your first festival, though. We were talking about that, which is great. What are some of the factors that you look into when you are thinking about submitting to a festival and going like, okay, I'm thinking my premiere may be here. I'm thinking that maybe, what do you look for in a festival?
This is a documentary, so my first goal would be for it to play at all the best documentary festivals and kind of get some of those accolades. And then my second just focus was locally, and one, because I can get to those festivals easily, and since it's called The Day That Shook Georgia, I figured some festivals in Georgia might be interested in it. So premiering at this South Georgia Festival has been really cool because it's we're right 2 hours from where it happened, and there was a man at our show our screening yesterday who was spending the night last night in Woodbine, Georgia, because he had a friend who lived down here. So, and has family in the area, and he's been back and forth to this area his whole life, and he had never heard anything about it. So that was pretty exciting just to talk to him. So this is a great kickoff. I don't know if we'll have that many festival appearances with this film, since we are going to be on PBS in a month. So I think some festivals might say, oh, well, you're already on broadcast, so we're not interested. But we'll see. We're going to do a special screening at the Jimmy Carter Presidential Library. So that will be a cool event, and maybe we'll get some folks in Atlanta to come out and get some of the folks in our film to be there. I would hope we could maybe get into hot docs or
True false, frame line, that
yeah, we didn't get into True False. I love True False. I think this is maybe a little too much of a straight history documentary than True False might be looking for. Maybe the Savannah Film Festival where I live, and Full Frame is another great one down here in the South. So we'll see. I love going to festivals, so just personally that would be fun. But I'm really grateful that this film is already going to have a good exposure on broadcast, and I've had other films where we spent years on the festival circuit before we found or didn't find a sort of an online home for it, or a streaming home. And so with this, it's pretty cool that we're just going to get it out there.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you for sitting down with me for a little bit and talking about the day that shook Georgia, and thanks for coming to the festival. And I know that you have a more abbreviated stay than some people, so I'm glad that we had the chance to actually make time and sit down, and we had a little brief breakfast together. It was nice.
Yeah.
The one great thing about when a festival puts everyone up in the same hotel is like you run into everyone and you can kind of coordinate a little bit better. Like, who needs a ride to the festival? Who's my,
Easy. I love these small town festivals. We're all right here in a tight knit area. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and good luck with the premiere on PBS, and hopefully we'll see you at future festivals.
Hope so. Nice to meet you, Nick. Great questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.